Upon finishing Invisible Man by Ralph Ellison, some folks in our book club asked, why isn't this often in the discussion for the great American novel? So that's what we're talking about today, this incredible work by this quite famous author, but I feel like a book that doesn't really get mentioned much on social media anymore. So
no, not really.
Yeah. Welcome back to the Life on Books podcast. My name is Tony. With me as always is Andy, a.k.a. Metafictional Meathead. How are you?
I'm rethinking everything I was thinking about this book, hearing you describe it as a potential great American novel.
Spoiler alert, Andy did not like it. No, I don't know. We'll get into that.
Yeah, we'll get into it. I did like it, but
We will start with what is unquestionably everyone's favorite part of our show, which is the weekly reading update. The true fans love it. The new fans, well, maybe they're not new fans. Maybe they're not at all fans.
Who knows?
What have you been reading lately?
Mostly Invisible Man. I'm still chipping my way through 2666 and a little bit of 2666 by Bolano and a little bit of The Count of Monte Cristo. But I had fallen behind in Invisible Man.
Yep.
And I wanted to get caught up so I could, participate in the discussions. So I was putting, more time into this so I could get caught up.
Yep.
And then you were like, hey, are you going to be done this weekend? So, and had you not said that, I probably wouldn't have, I have finished it, but had you, not said that,
yeah,
I probably wouldn't have finished it yesterday. So most of my reading the last week or so has gone into Invisible Man.
Cool.
But that's really it. I haven't started much of anything new. I mean, I haven't really felt the like. And obviously, there's tons of books at home that I want to read, but I haven't.
Yeah.
I've been able to like fight off the squirrels, being like, "I'll start this."
Yep.
And part of that is obviously wanting to finish this, stay engaged in what we're reading for the book club, and be able to talk about it on the show, and then just other stuff in life. I'm just like, no, I'm okay.
You keep a pretty packed schedule.
Yeah.
So, well, the turns have tabled because for once I have many more books to discuss.
Holy Moses.
I'll start off by saying that the March book club read is Carpentaria by Alexis Wright. So I did start that yesterday. I read the first 2 chapters. I'm a little, we'll see. I'm not like in love with it, but
Yeah.
not.
Maybe I'll start that today or tomorrow.
Yeah.
I'm excited for it. I've talked about it on the show before. I had started Praiseworthy last year, which a handful of people whose opinions I've trust, had really good things to say about that. I've heard more praise for Carpentaria. I don't know formal pronunciation, but and I was like, I liked parts of Praiseworthy, but it was still when I was like trying to get back to reading after, my life being flipped upside down.
Yeah.
And I just didn't have the like.
You didn't finish it?
No.
Gotcha.
I wasn't enjoying reading, period, at the time. Like, I just kind of was like, not focused. It was just almost like going through the motions.
Yeah.
And I was like, it's a long book. It's like 700 something pages, I think.
Yeah, it's quite a bit longer than this one.
Yeah. And I was just kind of like, I need something that's gonna like, that I know will grab me. I know will get my attention. And
yeah, I've heard a lot of mixed reviews about Praiseworthy. Pretty much only accolades for Carpentaria, but somebody, I had posted that I started this yesterday on my Instagram stories, and somebody messaged me and said, "Oh, I started Praiseworthy last year and I just couldn't get into it." So.
One of the things about Praiseworthy that kind of threw me is, at least in the bit that I had read, is very short chapters, or like, it's divided into parts, and then the chapters or sections within that are only a handful of pages.
Mm-hmm.
And sort of, I wouldn't necessarily say like a vignette style, but adjacent to that.
Mm-hmm.
And I can be really hit or miss with those. I find they work a lot better, or I engage with them more if it's like a shorter novel.
Yeah.
Told in that way. Sometimes if it's a like I said, a 700-ish page book, and each chapter is only like 2 or 3 pages, I might only read 10 pages. And, it's that kind of dopamine effect. Like, excuse me, read it every day for a week and I'm 60 pages in.
Yeah.
It's just kind of like, oh, okay.
Yeah.
This is, going to be.
Yeah, when you have another 650 to go.
Yeah.
Or whatever.
Yeah. Sometimes we kind of gripe on the show about like long chapters.
Yeah.
And, like, oh, I'm going to read one chapter, and then one chapter turns out to be 60 pages. And you're like, just kind of almost like counting down, like, okay, 15 more pages, and then I can go, watch TV or something.
Yeah.
But sometimes I like that feeling of like, okay, like I'm going to be in this for a while.
Yeah.
And there was a bit of disconnect when I was reading Praiseworthy. But again, I was not in a good headspace at the time. So it could have been that. So I don't want to bash the book or the author.
Well, everyone that started the book so far in the club has said they feel like they're going to love it. So that's a good sign.
I'm excited for it for sure.
Yeah. I've also, since we last did this, read Woman Running in the Mountains by Yuko Tsushima, which is a Japanese author. This one is translated by Geraldine Harcourt. Apparently has passed on in 2019. It was okay. It was probably, out of all the NYRB books I've read, my least favorite. Mm-hmm. They usually are almost all winners. And not that this was bad, but like, it's about a young woman who gets pregnant out of wedlock, which I guess in the 70s in Japan was kind of taboo.
That sounds right. That makes sense for
Yeah.
what I know about Japan.
Yeah, and so she like brings shame to her family, and her family wants her to either get an abortion or give up the child for adoption. She stubbornly doesn't want to, and then she also doesn't really want like help from anybody. She's like stubbornly wants to do everything herself, and so I feel like if you are a woman who's going to be a mom soon, or is pregnant, or recently had a kid, or even if you had a kid a long time ago, you could probably relate a lot to this book, because it's a lot about like just like the psychological things you go through pregnancy and giving birth and stuff.
Yeah.
It's, just something that I'm not ever going to experience. And
Yeah,
so I can't really connect with it, but the writing was good.
I've run into that before with, obviously I haven't read that book, but with like some other books where it's, about motherhood or something like that. And, this is something I think about when people are like, oh, you haven't read any books by women. Like I'll read something that's about motherhood and I'll appreciate the quality of the writing, the all of the artistic qualities of the novel. I'll think highly of, but like it's nothing I will ever experience.
Yeah.
And there's again that little bit of disconnect. And maybe that's my fault as a reader, who knows, but like
I think that part of the problem too was for me not really being able to personally connect with the subject, combined with kind of that classic somber, understated Asian style that you get with Japanese literature sometimes. It just was like I felt like not a lot was going on.
Yeah.
And that really relied on you being able to like empathize with this character. And I'm just like, yeah, that sucks. She's doing a good job. But I just kind of felt like nothing was really happening for me.
Yeah.
But yeah, it is what it is. Last night I started Pedro Paramo by Juan Rulfo. I don't know. Have you read this?
I have.
Cool. I'm only like 30 pages in, but very interesting so far. Short little classic of, is he Mexican? Mexican literature?
I believe so.
Yeah. So, and this edition is translated by Douglas J. Weatherford, and it's a new translation. It has a foreword by Gabriel Garcia Marquez, who famously said that this book was very inspirational for him. I kind of came back. I took a break from Something Happened by Joseph Heller. I just picked it up again the end of this week after finishing Invisible Man. So that's going. And I also started,
Holy
and I'm loving
Moses.
Warrior Dreams, Violence and Manhood in Post-Vietnam America by James William Gibson. And this book is totally blowing my mind.
I'm assuming it's nonfiction.
It's nonfiction.
Yeah.
The general thesis is that our government, and somebody was griping in the comments about us talking about politics, which is hilarious to me. I guess this is supposed to be about bucks. But the general thesis of this book is that our government basically spent all this time making communism this boogeyman after World War II and the start of the Cold War, and then we go into Vietnam and we lose, and it like
Whoa! What are you talking about?
yeah.
We lost?
So
America lost?
America was a loser. And I don't like losers. So he basically posits that it like fractured the American psyche because you had these people who were raised on America's the best, we're number one, we're
Rock, flag, and eagle.
yeah, we're we know no one can overcome us. We are unbeatable and we win because we're right and we're the good guys and we're, you know what I mean?
Rah.
And communism's the devil, it's evil, it's this great nemesis. And then we go in there and it doesn't go well. And then because of that, he argues that like particularly men have this disillusionment with kind of the traditional structures in our society of government, military, police. And this is actually very interesting, right? Because you have something like the January 6th incident. Yeah. And you have all these people that are typically seemingly pro-police, and then they literally go and assault, and actually I think somebody got killed. A police officer got killed during that. So. And so this book kind of explains like that contradiction of like these people kind of empathize, or I guess maybe resonate with the idea of order and structure that you get with like the police or the military. And of course there's like a gun culture around that. It's a culture of violence around that as well. But at the same time, they inherently believe that these traditional structures are subject to failings and corruption. And it's going to take like a lone soldier or smaller group of radical, these people actually are the ones fighting against corruption. And then he lays out the pathway of how we got there with media. And he just, I kind of already knew this, but like the amount of movies and books and magazines that he references, you're like, oh wow, this was bad.
Yeah.
Like Rambo, Commando, Predator. It's all like these guys who are kind of somehow attached to the military or the police, like the Punisher.
Yep.
But then they are the truth seekers that know the true way to save people and do the right thing. And it takes that act of going against the grain. And you start to go like, oh wow, yeah, like that's literally this is how we got to where we are right now.
Yeah.
The immense amount of propaganda. And because, a lot of this stuff was actually funded by the government, like the Pentagon pays sometimes.
No way.
Make movies and TV shows. And
I, for one, am shocked.
Yeah. But it's just when you start to see like the list of like film titles, you're like, oh. Like,
not even films, like books, everything. Like, yeah.
I forget what I probably flagged it, but I don't have like quick to pull up here. But there was one thing he said. It was like in a 5 or 6 year period, there was something like 240 films that were made that kind of portrayed this idea. And I was like, holy smokes.
Yeah.
So very interesting book. Hard to get a hold of. I looked online. It's like out of print. I don't even remember where I got my copy. I think it was from when the old Number 6 Depot's other store went out of business, and they said you can come in and just take whatever.
Yeah.
I think I grabbed it then. So
Cool.
yeah. So that is the weekly reading update. Let's
Not to delay
sure.
the discussion that people are actually here for any longer, but I've also been adding to my cinematic repertoire.
Oh, very nice.
I watched The War of the Roses last night
Nice.
with Michael Douglas and Kathleen Turner.
I haven't seen it. It's an 80s movie, isn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's going to drive me nuts now if I
Michael Douglas, he's got to be getting up there in age.
yeah.
He's gonna
And Danny DeVito.
Oh, nice.
He starred and directed.
Oh, wow.
Kathleen Turner. Yep, Kathleen.
Sweet.
And it was
It's a
awesome.
comedy, isn't it?
Yeah, it's pretty dark.
Oh, okay, cool.
But it's about this, couple that meet when they're like post-grad-ish
Yep.
age and then get married, have a family, and then have a very, very tremendously and hilariously messy divorce.
Nice.
And it's cool. It's like this, it's like a frame narrative. So Danny DeVito's character is a lawyer, and the movie starts off with this guy coming to him because him and his wife are potentially getting a divorce. And so Danny DeVito's character tells him the story of the Rose family and their horrible divorce as kind of like a cautionary tale. Mm-hmm. So it's like that, story within a story type deal. And I generally like, both in books and films, movies, whatever, that kind of frame structure.
Yeah.
But it was awesome. It was
Nice. I'll have
great.
to watch it.
And I ate a ton of Chinese food.
Fantastic.
So excuse
From
any,
Chengdu?
of course.
Nice.
So excuse any indigestion that comes up this morning.
Maybe we should get Tums as a sponsor of the show.
That would be fantastic.
Apropos. It'd be apropos.
Yeah.
Okay.
Let's do it.
Let's talk about Invisible Man. So
Yeah.
at the top of the show, you had mentioned you're questioning everything you thought you knew about the book.
Yeah.
Well, first of all, if you're not familiar with Invisible Man, I'd be surprised because why are you watching this? But I guess maybe you just are a fan of us, which is weird.
No,
but,
it's not weird. You can like us. We're likable.
It was originally published in the early 50s after being written in the late 40s. So ramping up right at the start of the civil rights movement. It is written by a black man, so there are, I would say, in that time period, kind of expectantly themes of race and social inequities. But I would say that's not what the entire book is about, which I guess Ellison was a little criticized for upon its publication. But most everyone in the book club really enjoyed it, although we do have a few people in the club that are part of the black community, and they, I would say, are probably the most outspoken about not liking the book.
Interesting.
And they offered some interesting perspectives on that I would love to talk about. But let me hear your general thoughts before we get cracking here.
So I really liked it.
Okay.
I liked it. I said this to you the other day. I think I said this during one of the book club discussions. For me, it was very similar to what I was feeling when we did Song of Solomon, in the sense that while I was actively reading it, the book is in my hand, I'm sitting in the chair with it, I was really enjoying it. But I also had to be like almost force myself to be like, you're going to sit down and read this today.
Yeah.
Like, there's, in the back of my mind, I was like, I'd love to keep reading 2666. But it's like, no, I should read Invisible Man.
Yeah.
Like, it was like that. Like, I liked it. I was enjoying reading it. I found it an engaging experience. But it just, like, once I put the book down and was done for the night, I wasn't at work the next day, like, ruminating over what I read or, like, looking forward to getting home so I could keep reading it. What I was joking about when at the top of the show, when I was like, oh, I'm questioning everything I thought about it, It was more so like, I think for better or worse, when this book gets talked about, it's either talked about or being associated with works of Black or African American fiction, literature, whatever you want to call it, whatever way to phrase it is not going to get me canceled. And generally within that like smaller window, especially with the like themes of race and social inequity, like you were talking about, that's kind of the perspective I was reading it from. And there's, obviously things within the novel that are larger than race. Obviously there's a lot of the question of social inequity is often correctly tied to race. But that idea of social inequity also extends beyond race. There's an economic element to it. And it was not something, when you kind of said something about it being like a great American novel, I think that larger idea of the social inequity is a facet of that. And that just kind of larger idea of it being a great American novel was not something I had considered up until you said that. And I don't mean that to say that that was an inept or incorrect way to phrase it. It was just not something that I had really thought about. And I think that, was it could be a good way to put it. So that's like I said, I enjoyed it. It was just, you added a layer that I had not really considered.
Yeah. Well, I think you bring up a great point, and it actually ties directly into one of the themes of this book, which is that there's a lot in our societal structure that, whatever the cause may be, it is deeply ingrained now into our education, into our workplaces and everything. And you just kind of inherently start to think a certain way because of that.
Yeah.
And I agree with you. Like, a lot of times the tendency is to be like, Toni Morrison's, the best Black American author. And it's just like, well, why not? That is true. And that is praise, but like, why not
the best
American author?
Right.
Or why does she have to be the best American woman author?
Yeah.
Why these qualifiers?
I think that's a great way to put it. Like, I had sort of attached these qualifiers to it, and it affected the perspective I had while reading it. I don't know if it's fair to say positively or negatively.
Yeah.
But it affected how I read it.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, it's not necessarily a bad thing. Like
I certainly took things away from it that were beyond the idea of, the race struggle.
Right.
But they are also the race struggle is also a prominent part of the book. So it's
right.
It's not like a super easy separation.
Right.
There's some work between the lines that has to be done to kind of see it as a greater American novel as opposed to a great Black American novel.
Right.
Which, shamefully on my part, I don't think I did enough of that work. But
have you heard this question before? There's a father and son, and they get in a car accident.
Yeah.
Are you familiar with this?
Yeah. How the doctor?
The father dies, and
Yeah.
the son's rushed to the hospital.
Yeah.
And when they get to the hospital, the doctor says, "This is my son. I can't operate on him. How is that possible?"
Right.
So if you haven't heard that before, ponder on that for a moment.
That's some A1 boomer humor.
Well, it's not really boomer humor so much as it is just showing people's inherent bias.
Boomer humor.
Yeah. So the solution to the riddle is the doctor is his mother, but most people can't figure it out because you automatically think of a doctor as a man.
Yeah.
Right. Or a lot of people do. I shouldn't say everyone, but like that's kind of like when you're like, wait, what?
Yeah.
So I think it's kind of like one of those situations. You're not necessarily like blatantly sexist, but like our culture has kind of imprinted this bias onto
There's
you.
inherent cultural bias, and then, like I was saying, there's also just like everything I have heard attached to this book.
Yeah.
Like I kind of, I don't know, preconceived notion has a bit of a negative connotation, but like went in with some sort of preconceived idea
Yeah.
of what the book was going to be like, and especially like the prologue where he's talking about this invisibility and the like the early first 2 or 3 chapters after the prologue, like his race and his identity
Yeah.
are a huge part of what's taking place in the early exposition. And then, once he gets to New York, it expands beyond that.
Yeah.
But like the opening of the book is very heavy with the idea of race.
Yeah. Well, I guess we should maybe at least kind of preface this with what the general book is about if you have not read it. So it's told in the first person. We do not know the protagonist / narrator's name. It's never revealed throughout the book. And it follows his journey as a young high school student up through moving to New York and kind of his struggles to fit in. He's originally from the South.
Goes to college in the South, and then
Right.
from there goes to New York.
Right. So, I think for me, kind of the overarching theme of the book is how we kind of deceive ourselves into thinking that things are a certain way when they're not.
Yeah.
There's definitely a layer of like naivete from the protagonist that kind of bites him in the butt a few times throughout the story. But I also think it is quite a bit a pretty heavy critique of the American Communist Party at the time.
Yeah.
And kind of like the broader social struggles that were happening in that era.
For sure. One of the things that I kept coming back to while I was reading it, and someone mentioned this, I don't remember if it was at the first discussion or just like prior to us starting, in the chat or whatever. And I cannot remember who it was, but someone talked about the like systems of control. How, someone was like, "Oh, Andy, you like pension," and this is a big theme of his, his work.
I think it was Buddy, yeah.
Yeah. Well, we made it. Oh, a whole 30 minutes. Wow.
So before we mentioned pension.
Yeah. And I was like, okay, like that's, obviously something to like keep an eye out for. And that was something that was like constantly coming up for me. And I think that's something that one of the themes that, I was talking about earlier that kind of goes beyond race.
Yeah.
Obviously when he's in New York and he joins this brotherhood, which is pretty obviously supposed to be some offshoot of a communist party.
Yeah.
He feels like he's being given some autonomy and it even comes up, I don't want to spoil anything, but it like comes up later that he assumed he had some autonomy to make a decision. And, he feels like he's gone past the, when he was in the South and he was kind of beholden to what the administration of the college, or when he was finally gets to New York and he has to be on his best behavior so he can get a job. And, he's kind of beholden to what other people think of him and want him to do so that he can get a leg up in life. And then he joins this, brotherhood, and he feels like he has some, control over what he's going to be doing, within his district. And then he's out of nowhere kind of beholden to this committee.
Yeah.
That is never really seen. They're kind of just figures in the background. And, he makes decisions that he thinks will be for the good of the community, good for benefit the brotherhood, things like that. And it's just, they're like, why would you do that?
Yeah.
And I think, you know, in some of those situations, like his decisions were correct. Like he probably did a good thing, but the committee is kind of blind to the fact that he did it without their permission or their direction.
Right.
So it's kind of like, well, you know, why would you do that? We didn't tell you to.
Yeah.
And they're blind to the benefits that are going to come from it.
Yeah.
So like that idea of control comes back a lot. And that was something that like I was constantly making note of.
Has Pynchon ever mentioned Ellison anywhere? Because I mean, you would assume that Pynchon's probably a pretty well-read person.
Yeah.
And they're definitely this predates anything that he published, and so I just wonder if if he ever mentioned any influence there, because there were a couple things that were, I thought, similar.
Yeah.
Guess we could Google it.
I can't think of any direct references, at least in any of his novels. I mean, I know Gravity's Rainbow has reference to Ishmael Reed.
Yeah, Mumbo Jumbo.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Which was one of the suggestions I made for the February book club. But
well, when I Google Ralph Ellison, Thomas Pynchon, a Reddit thread in the Thomas Pynchon subreddit comes up saying Thomas Pynchon references ? Now the question is where. Oh, here we go. So this says, I've read the early period Pynchon works, blah, 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 blah. I've read some people speculate on his influences. Off the top of my head, I can recall him naming James Joyce, Rilke, Dickinson, Ishmael Reed, Lord Byron, and others. I'm sure I've forgotten some.
I feel like someone probably just ended up mentioning
He
Ellison
says,
in a comment.
I see resemblance to Burroughs, Ralph Ellison, Henry James, Saul Bellow, Vladimir Nabokov, and Melville. Yeah, I mean, I see some similarities too, not necessarily in the style, but thematically.
Yeah.
Although there were a couple things. Let's talk about the style of this book.
I would be hard pressed to believe that Pynchon didn't encounter Ellison's work in some way.
Yeah, for sure.
Even if you didn't read the novel.
Yeah.
Like this would have been, it was originally published in 1947.
Was it? Yeah. Was it published in the late 40s? Yeah.
That's the first copyright date. So I feel comfortable making that assumption.
Sure.
Which I believe would have been, Pynchon was at Cornell.
Yeah.
You know, like it just seems like in some way or another, this book probably would have come across his radar.
Yeah. Yeah. Let's talk about the style of writing. What was kind of surprising to me was how quickly the style of writing could shift from chapter to chapter. I think the big shift for me the first time was, I believe it's chapter 5, where he goes to the sermon given by Barbie.
Yeah.
And Dr. Bledsoe's there. That was a little bit, again, this predates it, but was a little bit reminiscent of the Reverend character from Omen Setter's Luck.
Yeah.
To me, where it was kind of this really cerebral kind of rant almost.
Yeah. There was a little bit of, I wouldn't say fire and brimstone.
Right.
But it was not like God loves us all. We're going to be happy little children.
Yeah.
You know, it was
kind of like almost a violent.
Yeah. There was some gravity to it for sure.
Yeah. And I think with that character, and very similar to Omen Setter's Luck, is like, it makes you question the ethics of the person giving the speech.
Absolutely.
But overall, you know, what does this novel remind you of, if anything, stylistically in the writing? Wouldn't be a podcast episode without my dog barking.
It reminds me of a loud Akita.
Aga, it's podcast time, bud.
I don't know. You know, I mean, it certainly reminded me of Morrison.
Yeah.
I think it has that unique voice of like a early 20th century. I don't even want to say black author, but like I'll use a word that Ellison uses to describe the kind of group of people within this district, this like dispossessed person that is kind of outside society, I think dispossessed is the perfect way to put it. You know, like downtrodden, but like, you know, is not enjoying the fruits of, you know, the post World War II economic boom.
Yeah.
Like is, you know, there's a lot of, obviously evictions are a prominent part of the narrative.
Yep.
Like, and they're written really well. It's not like, it's just kind of mentioned like off the cuff of like, oh yeah, so-and-so got evicted. Like you're right there watching these elderly characters who are not major parts of the narrative. They're just kind of supporting pieces, but you're watching these like elderly characters get evicted and not even with the dignity of being able to like move out themselves.
Yeah.
Like there's just marshals or whoever, some sort of amorphous authority figure just throwing their stuff on the street. And there's this crowd like gathered around. Like, why are you doing that? Like let them have some grace.
Yeah.
And you can tell just from that, with the weight those passages are written with, and the you know, heartfelt nature. Like you feel so much sympathy, and you're moved so deeply by these passages. Like I was reading them, I was like, this fucking like this is so stupid. Like
Yeah.
you can tell that Ellison, even if he personally had not been evicted, could not have been that far removed from someone that had been, whether it was a friend or family, or he passed, you know, was walking down the street and passed by someone getting evicted. Like he captured that, the emotion of that situation so well.
Yeah.
Like this wasn't written by someone, you know, from the ivory tower watching down on all of the awful things and just witnessing the social inequity of that period of time. Like he was a part of it.
I think it really highlights his talent as a writer. And I kind of felt about the book the same way you did, which is I enjoyed it while I was reading it, but it wasn't necessarily calling to me when it wasn't in my hand, which I think is more just to do with like the time of year, things I have going on, nothing about the book specifically.
Yeah.
But more than any other book that I can recall as of late, did it like evoke like a physical reaction, like sick to my stomach. There's probably 3 or 4 parts in the book that really did that. One's very early on when he's still at high school before he goes to college.
Yeah.
There's some stuff that happens at his first job in New York that's pretty shocking. And so what was kind of fun about the novel is I felt like it had this interesting cadence to it where you'd read a chapter or part of a chapter and it would feel very normal. Like this is just a story about a guy going through his life. It's nothing crazy. And then something wildly kind of violent would happen.
I think that is something that could be used in the case of considering this a great American novel.
Right.
Is you have someone that's just kind of going about their life, struggling, I might add. You know, he has to work to get to, you know, the next rung, and things seem to kind of even out and he feels comfortable. And then there's this, something happens due to a system of control that he has no autonomy over that springs forth the next action.
Yeah.
That there's this element of not, you know, you talked about it earlier, there's this element of not knowing what's going to happen next.
Right.
And the thing that happens next is something that he has no control over, didn't really influence in any way, and just kind of, flips him into this next phase of his life.
Yeah. I think
and it's jarring when it happens in the book because there's this drastic shift in tone and pacing and things like that. You talked about the violence, but maybe not the violence, but that's kind of how these random events in anybody's life happen.
Right.
Like things seem to be going steady Eddie, and then there's this drastic shift.
Yeah, something upends everything.
And then you're right. And then, everything's on fire.
Yeah.
Yeah,
it's I don't know. I just thought the writing was really, you could tell how much talent he had.
Yeah.
And it's surprising that this is the only novel of his that was published in his lifetime. He had Juneteenth, which was published posthumously, I believe.
Yeah.
And he wrote some essays and some nonfiction stuff, but I think this is the only work of fiction. So, yeah. The other thing about it that's interesting, I always try, especially with a book that is a social critique, I try to keep in mind the time period and kind of what maybe the public reaction would have been.
Yeah.
When this came out. But I felt this way, and a lot of people in the book club mentioned this as well, which is that this feels like it could be written today. Which
I was just going to say that, I kind of am the flip side of that. Like you were just talking about, reading something that's a work of social critique. You were reading it like what could have been the perception at the time it was published. And I'm sure you were doing this too, but I think about it, it's like, how much of this is still happening?
Well, that it makes you kind of sad, right? Because we talk so much about progress and change, and then you kind of think I don't want to. Not really that much has changed.
I don't want to spoil any of the major events, but there's something that occurs towards the end of the novel where there's violence done by the police and a very strong reaction to that from the public. And the public is not happy.
Yeah. Right.
That's not heard of any. You know what I mean?
Right.
I'm reading that and oh shit. This, it's 70 years later and we're still doing this.
Yeah. Yep.
Like that particular scene and passage in Fallout that I'm talking about, that could happen tomorrow.
Right.
That, something like that happened. It was a major part of the last 5 years.
Yeah. I think too, so much of this book is about different types of violence.
Yeah.
Too. How we the traditional kind of definition is physical punching, kicking, cutting, shooting, whatever. But a lot of this is violence through disenfranchising people.
Disenfranchisement and systems of control.
Right.
It's a soft violence is
right.
kind of a misnomer, but it's not, it's indirect.
Yeah. I mean, if you throw somebody in a hole and you lock them there with no food and they starve to death, that's violence.
Right. Right.
Yeah. So there's a lot to unpack.
I think it's going to be one of those books that as time passes, especially through discussions like this, my appreciation for it will grow.
I completely agree. I mean, I know a few people in the club have said that they want to reread it. But I will add to this that, as I mentioned earlier, some folks had mentioned that it's a hard book for them to read. And Lisa in our group had mentioned that she kind of always felt like a big theme of the book is the invisible man trying to pacify the white community by acting more white.
Yeah.
And she thinks that maybe, that was maybe subconsciously instilled in Ellison, maybe he was personally trying to be, trying to fit into white culture, and that kind of came through on the pages for her. So I thought that was interesting.
Yeah, that's an interesting perspective that I don't think I'm qualified to speak on based on my life.
Same.
But
yeah.
I do think there's an element of like, with the prologue, the way the prologue starts off, like he's already he's already the invisible man.
Right.
Like he's kind of just going about his life and not really being seen by other people. And it kind of has this tragic air about it, about like, how does someone end up becoming this like invisible member of society,
right,
that can just go down the street and beat the bag out of someone,
yeah,
and not really be noticed,
yeah,
right? And like it doesn't feel good,
yeah,
and a lot of the narrative is kind of obviously setting up to and getting to how he got to that point. And you kind of have the feeling, at least I did from the prologue and the early chapters, that like it wasn't going to be, again, it was going to be something that was out of his control.
yeah.
Like obviously from the prologue, the invisibility is kind of symbolic of his race.
Right.
At least that was my perspective of it. But
yeah, I think it's that. But as you mentioned earlier too, it could also be applied to like economic class.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. But through no fault of his own, he's invisible. And then, by the end of it, and I guess slight spoiler here, like that invisibility is kind of intentional.
Right.
Which seems to go against a lot of what the protagonist was trying to do with, the brotherhood, trying to get an education, all of these things. And then he realized, like, I don't have control.
Yeah.
I'm just going to hide.
Well, I think that is a major theme of the book. So there's a lot of dialogue or just themes of people with opinions about how to behave in society as a black person.
Mm-hmm.
So he gets like input from his grandfather at the very beginning of the book, and he gets input from Bledsoe at Dr.
Mm-hmm.
Bledsoe at the college, and he gets input from the people at the paint factory,
right,
and the Brotherhood. And they all have different opinions on how you're supposed to act, how to get what you need, how to get what you want. And I think for me, like what Ellison was really pointing to was everyone's got these grand theories of how to solve this puzzle, but it's like there really isn't anything you can do because it's a systemic problem. It's not
a puzzle that the individual should be solving.
Correct. It's not a personal failing. It's a problem with the system itself that you're existing in.
To some degree, it shouldn't really be a puzzle at all.
Right.
Like,
I mean,
this is a person. You should treat him like a person.
Yeah. But we see that today too with like all of this in just complete insanity about, kids these days are lazy and just walk into a business and give them a firm handshake and you'll get a job. And
right.
It's like, bro, you could never have another Starbucks coffee for the rest of your life. But if you are getting paid $10 an hour and it costs $2,500 a month to rent an apartment,
right?
That's not a personal failing,
right?
And,
right.
And so, like, sure, there are like some things you can do to have some movement within that system, but ultimately, the system can crush you if it gets bad enough.
Yeah.
So
I do think it's kind of funny, hearing you say that. So we touched on this, that, the Brotherhood is kind of an obvious stand-in for some sort of communist organization.
Yeah.
And there's some, I don't know if satirical is the right word, but there's some elements of critique to that Brotherhood and presumably the communist movement as a whole. But obviously in the book, they're doing a poor job of it. But like, to some degree, that party was trying to rally against the system that Ellison is critiquing in this novel.
Right.
And he's critiquing a movement that is, trying to fight the system, there's a lot of interesting juxtaposition.
Yeah, but there's a great biopic about Dalton Trumbo, the author that wrote Johnny Got His Gun, and he was a screenwriter, very successful screenwriter, and he was part of the American Communist Party, and I think it was Congress maybe even passed a bill basically like barring them I think it was. Anyway, there was something passed where it barred known communists from participating in the Writers Guild. And so he basically got like blackballed from the industry. And again, you might look at that and go, okay, well, yeah, he's like fighting the system, but also he was already independently wealthy from his career at that point. So he could afford, he still found ways to work around that, but like, he could survive, if you were a very impoverished person, you didn't have the luxury to be like, yeah, let me fight the power. Like, you would just bend the knee because you have to survive.
Right.
So,
right.
Yeah, I think kind of that was a little bit of what like Ellison was getting.
Yeah. And I don't mean that as a critique of Ellison.
Right.
It's just, I think it's just furthering or further shows that like the larger puzzle at whole that needs to be solved. It's not really black and white.
Yeah, for sure.
There are a lot of factors at play, and it's a complicated thing.
Right, and that's kind of the tough thing too about some of these alliances sometimes when it's like the enemy of my enemy is my friend. Okay, but now you eliminate that enemy, but now this person that you were only friends with because you had a common enemy, now what happens between you two? Like, right. So, yeah. Cool.
And I think a lot of this is like, there's only so much I can say because of my background and upbringing, and the word privilege gets thrown around a lot. Like I think to some degree, like I don't have, or I've had the privilege of not having to deal with at least some of the societal woes that Ellison touches on. Yeah. So how much, there's only so much insight I can offer into the discussion.
Yeah, definitely. I agree. All right. Is there anything else you want to add about the book before do you want to do for the Patreon bonus, do you want to do a spoiler edition of this, or do you want to talk about 100 Years of Solitude, the television show?
I think we should save 100 Years of Solitude.
You want to do a whole episode on it?
A whole episode, or I only have one episode left of that.
Okay.
So whether it's a freebie or a Patreon, I'd like to wait until I finish it.
Cool. All right. Well, unless you have anything else to add, we'll shift into a spoiler edition of this conversation for our Patreon members. If you want to support the show and join an awesome community, we've actually just moved the whole discussion over to our Discord server, which has totally exploded participation. There's a link down below. It's only $5 a month to join the book club. There's a lot of stuff going on in the book club. There's a lot of discussion. There's weekly live chats about the books we're reading. There's a bunch of additional content that we don't post anywhere else on any other social media platform. And I guess thanks for listening. We'll see you next week. All right.
Over and out.